The air over Jerusalem hung heavy with dread as distant horns echoed across the hills. Babylonian banners, stitched with lion emblems, glimmered in torchlight as Nebuchadnezzar's army advanced like a tide of iron. Farmers fled from the surrounding fields, and priests whispered desperate prayers in the temple. This wasn't just war, it was the collision of empires. In the silence between drumbeats, Jerusalem's citizens sensed the end of an age. Above, the night sky glowed faintly red with campfires as tens of thousands of Babylonian soldiers encircled the city. For Jerusalem, this was no ordinary siege. It was the moment the city's future hung in the balance. Nebuchadnezzar II wasn't merely a conqueror, he was a tactician obsessed with power. He knew Jerusalem controlled the corridor between Mesopotamia and Egypt, the lifeline of trade and tribute. Cutting off this route meant choking his rivals economically. By besieging Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar could seize manpower, wealth, and legitimacy. His generals constructed siege ramps, dug trenches, and positioned massive battering rams. This wasn't a reckless attack. It was a calculated move to bring Judah permanently under Babylonian control. While swords gleamed and catapults stood ready, the real battle was for dominance over gold, grain, and people. Inside Jerusalem's royal court, King Zedekiah's face reflected flickering lamplight. Once appointed by Babylon as a vassal, he had rebelled, gambling on Egyptian aid that never came. Now, betrayal's price was at his gates. His advisors whispered conflicting counsel: surrender to Babylon and live, or fight and risk annihilation. The king's trembling hands rested on a scroll from Jeremiah, warning him of doom. In the palace's high windows, the glow of Babylonian fires encircled the city like a noose. For Zedekiah, the crown had become a curse. Weeks turned into months. Jerusalem became a prison. Markets emptied, grain stores dwindled, and disease crept through the alleys. Mothers rationed bread, soldiers sharpened dull blades, and priests burned incense hoping to appease God. Children peered over ramparts at the looming siege towers. Babylon's archers loosed flaming arrows by night to shatter morale. Inside, every clang of a hammer from the enemy camp was a drumbeat of doom. The city's once lively courtyards echoed with whispers of despair. Survival was no longer about politics, but about enduring hunger and terror. The Babylonians brought engineering unmatched in the ancient world. Towering siege engines clad in rawhide to resist fire crept toward Jerusalem's walls. Iron-tipped battering rams swung like pendulums, splintering outer gates. Engineers pushed ramps higher as archers covered them with a hail of arrows. The ground shook with each impact. For the defenders, every crash was a prophecy fulfilled. Their walls were mortal and the enemy tireless. Nebuchadnezzar's siege wasn't just force, it was a masterpiece of coordination and terror. As panic spread, Prophets roamed the streets crying warnings. Some promised divine deliverance, others thundered judgment. Jeremiah, gaunt and relentless, urged surrender, calling it God's will. Crowds jeered and hurled stones at him, while priests clung to their rituals. In the chaos, prophecy became a weapon, hope for some, condemnation for others. Jerusalem's faith, once unshakable, now cracked like its city walls. The battle for hearts and minds raged alongside swords and siege engines. Rumors swept through the city. Egypt was marching to their aid. Soldiers cheered, women wept, and Zedekiah felt a flicker of hope. But days passed, and no banners appeared on the horizon. Egypt's armies faltered, and Babylon tightened its grip. That false dawn broke Jerusalem's spirit more than famine or arrows. Hope delayed became another weapon for Nebuchadnezzar, grinding the city into despair. On a dawn heavy with ash, Babylon struck. Their battering rams, after months of pounding, finally cracked the outer defenses. Soldiers poured through the breach, shields locked, spears glinting. Shouts rose, steel clashed, and Jerusalem's defenders fought street by street. Smoke curled from burning homes as civilians fled into the temple courts seeking sanctuary. This was no longer a siege, it was slaughter. The city of David was falling, stone by stone, breath by breath. Under cover of night, King Zedekiah fled through a hidden passage with his guards, hoping to reach the Jordan plain. But Babylonian scouts intercepted them. His army scattered, his sons captured. The once proud king who defied an empire now stood trembling before Nebuchadnezzar's officers. His escape was over, and his dynasty doomed. In that moment, the fall of a man mirrored the fall of a nation. The Babylonians stormed the Temple of Solomon, the heart of Judah's faith. Gold and sacred vessels were looted, priests cut down at the altar. Then the torches were thrown, and fire roared through cedar beams and gold-plated walls. For centuries, this had been the place of God's presence. Now it was a furnace of smoke and ruin. Witnesses wept as the holy sanctuary turned to ash under a foreign sky. Survivors were herded into columns, men, women, children, and elders shackled together. Babylonian soldiers barked orders as they drove the captives eastward toward the Euphrates. The once proud citizens of Jerusalem now trudged barefoot, staring back at the smoke rising from their ruined city. This was not simply relocation, it was the deliberate removal of a people's identity and power. The road to Babylon became a corridor of lamentation, each step echoing the psalms of sorrow. In Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar celebrated. His palace walls were draped with banners proclaiming his victory over Judah. Tribute poured into the city, gold, artisans and scribes captured from Jerusalem. Yet this was more than spoils, it was propaganda. He presented himself as the chosen instrument of Marduk, the god who toppled Yahweh's city. In his victory stages, Nebuchadnezzar etched Jerusalem's fall into stone, ensuring no rival would forget the price of rebellion. Jerusalem's scholars, priests and artisans were taken to Babylon, their skills repurposed for a foreign empire. Among them were young visionaries who would reshape their people's faith in exile. In Babylonian libraries, they encountered new ideas, myths, and sciences. The trauma of conquest became the seedbed of reinvention. The exile wasn't merely punishment, yes, it was transformation, an uprooting that forced Judah to redefine its identity without a temple or king. Not everyone was exiled. The poorest of the land, farmers and laborers, were left behind to till ruined fields under Babylonian governors. Amid burned villages and toppled altars, they struggled to survive, tending crops in sight of blackened temple stones. Their lives became a shadow of Judah's former kingdom. This remnant would carry faint embers of tradition, whispering stories of the lost city to future generations. By the rivers of Babylon, the exiles wept. Harps hung on willow trees, and songs once sung in the temple became laments. Poets began to write psalms of loss and hope, laying the foundation for scriptures that would outlast empires. In their grief, they forged a spiritual resilience that Babylon's chains could not break. The identity of a people shifted from a place to a promise, from a temple to a covenant. Nebuchadnezzar transformed Babylon into the showcase of the ancient world. The Ishtar Gate glowed with blue-glazed bricks and roaring lions, and the processional way displayed his victories in tile and stone. As exiles passed beneath these monuments, they felt their smallness before the empire's grandeur. This was psychological warfare in architecture, the power of Babylon immortalized in brick, pressing its dominance into every captive's memory. In exile, the words of Jeremiah gained new weight. He had warned of the fall, he had promised restoration after 70 years. These prophecies became lifelines, carried in secret scrolls and whispered in gatherings. Faith transformed from ritual sacrifice to the written word, from a temple-bound system to portable scripture. Out of devastation, a more enduring form of identity was born, one not tied to walls, but to memory. Exile forced interaction. Jewish artisans taught Babylonian elites crafts, while learning astronomy, mathematics, and myths in return. Some adapted to court life, others resisted. In the blending of cultures, ideas flowed both ways. Babylon became not just a prison, but an incubator of knowledge. From this crucible would emerge prophetic voices and texts that would define Judaism and, later, influence the world's great religions. Back in Judah, Jerusalem lay desolate, its walls broken, its temple gone. Jackals prowled its courtyards at night, yet scattered survivors began to gather, whispering prayers among the ruins. Without walls or kings, they reimagined their city as a spiritual ideal. This fragile beginning planted the seeds for eventual return and rebuilding. The silence of the ruined city became a canvas for hope. The siege and exile of 586 BCE were not just a political catastrophe, but a turning point in world history. Babylon thought it had erased a kingdom. Instead, it forged a people whose faith would endure empires. The trauma of Jerusalem's fall gave birth to resilience, scripture, and a renewed vision of identity. As centuries passed, the story of Babylon versus Jerusalem became a lesson about power, faith, and survival, echoing far beyond the walls that